The moving truck's engine sputtered to a stop, its final groan echoing through the quiet streets of Maplewood. Emily Matthews stood on the cracked sidewalk, her hands on her hips, surveying the modest apartment building before her. It was a far cry from their spacious Toronto home, but it was all she could afford now. "Mom?" Noah's voice, tinged with uncertainty, came from behind her. "Is this really it?" Emily turned to face her 10-year-old son, forcing a smile onto her face. "It sure is, kiddo. Our new adventure starts here." Noah's freckled face scrunched up in doubt, his eyes darting between the peeling paint of the building and the overgrown patch of grass that passed for a front yard. Emily's heart clenched at the sight. She knew this move had been hard on him, leaving behind friends, his school, the only home he'd ever known. But after the divorce and losing her job, they'd had no choice. "Come on," she said, injecting as much enthusiasm into her voice as she could muster. "Let's start unloading. I bet your room has a great view." As they carried boxes up to their third-floor walk-up, Emily couldn't help but notice the thinness of the walls, the way every footstep echoed. The apartment was small, with faded wallpaper and scuffed hardwood floors that had seen better days. Noah stood in the center of the living room, clutching a box of his belongings, looking lost. "It's smaller than I thought," he said quietly. Emily set down her own box and pulled him into a hug. "It's cozy," she corrected gently. "And it's just temporary, remember? Once I land a good job, we'll find an even better place." As if on cue, a car alarm blared from the street below, its shrill wail piercing through the thin walls. Noah winced, and Emily couldn't help but chuckle ruefully. "Well, at least we know the neighborhood watch is on duty," she quipped, earning a tiny smile from her son. They spent the rest of the day unpacking essentials, the silence punctuated by the occasional rumble of a passing truck or muffled voices from the apartment next door. As Emily arranged family photos on a rickety bookshelf, she allowed herself a moment of doubt. Had she made the right choice, uprooting their lives for a fresh start? The next morning dawned crisp and clear, a perfect September day. Emily, dressed in her most professional blouse and skirt combo, dropped Noah off at his new school before heading to the local employment agency. The quaint main street of Maplewood was a far cry from Toronto's bustling core, but she found herself appreciating the change of pace. The employment agency was a small, cluttered office with motivational posters peeling off the walls. Behind a desk piled high with papers sat Marge, a kindly woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense attitude. "I've got a few leads for you," Marge said as she shuffled through a stack of papers. "Mostly service industry stuff, I'm afraid. The job market's been tight lately." Emily's heart sank, but she nodded gratefully. "I'll take whatever I can get to start. I've got a little one to support." Marge's eyes softened. "Single mom, eh? Tell you what, there's one more possibility. It's not officially listed yet, but I heard through the grapevine that Thomas Blake is looking for a new housekeeper." "Thomas Blake?" Emily echoed, the name unfamiliar. "Oh, honey, you really are new in town," Marge chuckled. "The Blakes are old money around here. Their mansion's up on Hillcrest Drive. You can't miss it." Emily's eyebrows shot up. "A mansion? I don't know if I'm qualified for that kind of—" Marge waved away her concerns. "Nonsense. You've got hotel experience, right? Same principle, just a bigger house and fewer guests. Besides," she added with a wink, "I hear the pay is excellent." With Marge's encouragement, Emily found herself driving up Hillcrest Drive later that afternoon. As the road curved upward, modest homes gave way to sprawling estates hidden behind wrought iron gates and manicured hedges. She felt increasingly out of place in her second-hand sedan. Finally, she rounded a bend and gasped. Perched atop the hill, overlooking the entire town, stood Blake Mansion. Its imposing stone facade and towering chimneys spoke of old-world grandeur, a stark contrast to the cozy neighborhoods below. Emily parked in the circular driveway, her palms sweaty as she gripped the steering wheel. "You can do this," she muttered to herself. "It's just a house. A very, very big house." As she approached the massive oak door, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into another world entirely. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and rang the bell. The chimes echoed through the cavernous entryway, and Emily found herself holding her breath. After what felt like an eternity, the door swung open to reveal a tall, slender woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Yes?" the woman inquired, her tone clipped and efficient. Emily summoned her most professional smile. "Good afternoon. I'm Emily Matthews. I have an appointment with Mr. Blake regarding the housekeeper position." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing Emily from head to toe. "Very well. I'm Mrs. Winters, the current housekeeper. Follow me, please." Emily trailed behind Mrs. Winters, her sensible flats silent on the gleaming marble floors. The foyer alone was larger than her entire apartment, adorned with priceless artwork and antique furniture that made her acutely aware of every movement. As they ascended a sweeping staircase, Emily caught glimpses of vast, empty rooms. Despite the opulence, there was a palpable chill in the air that had nothing to do with temperature. The tick of an antique grandfather clock echoed through the halls, emphasizing the eerie silence. Mrs. Winters rapped sharply on a heavy wooden door. "Mr. Blake, your 2 o'clock appointment is here." "Send her in," came a muffled reply. Emily stepped into a spacious office, its walls lined with leather-bound books. Behind an imposing mahogany desk sat Thomas Blake, a man whose presence seemed to fill the room despite his average height. His salt-and-pepper hair was immaculately styled, and his piercing blue eyes fixed on Emily with an intensity that made her want to fidget. "Ms. Matthews, I presume?" he said, his voice cool and measured. "Yes, sir. Thank you for seeing me." The interview that followed was brisk and to the point. Thomas Blake was not a man who wasted words, and Emily found herself struggling to get a read on him. His questions were pointed, focused on her experience and availability rather than her personal life. "The position requires discretion and adaptability," he stated flatly. "The house must run like clockwork, regardless of my schedule or any special circumstances that may arise." Emily nodded, sensing there was more to that statement than met the eye. "Of course, Mr. Blake. I assure you, I'm very flexible and can handle any challenges that come my way." A flicker of something, approval, skepticism, crossed his face. "Very well. Mrs. Winters will show you around and go over the specifics of the job. If you're still interested, you can start on Monday." And just like that, Emily found herself with a job. As Mrs. Winters led her on a whirlwind tour of the mansion, Emily's head spun with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The salary was indeed excellent, more than enough to provide a stable life for Noah. But there was something about the empty halls and pristine rooms that felt lonely. As they passed a closed door on the second floor, Emily heard a muffled sound. She paused, frowning. "Is someone in there?" Mrs. Winters' face tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's young Master Oliver's room. Mr. Blake's son. He's not feeling well today." Emily's maternal instincts kicked in. "Oh, poor thing. Is there anything I can do to help?" "That won't be necessary," Mrs. Winters said quickly. "Mr. Blake prefers to handle his son's care personally." The tour continued, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story of young Oliver Blake. As she left the mansion that afternoon, her mind was already whirling with possibilities. This job would be more than just cleaning and organizing. She sensed that the Blake household held secrets, and part of her was determined to unravel them. Monday morning arrived all too quickly. Emily kissed Noah goodbye, her heart aching as she watched him trudge towards his new school, shoulders hunched against the world. She promised herself that this job would be worth it, for both of them. The mansion loomed before her once more. But this time, Emily was determined to face it head-on. Mrs. Winters met her at the door, armed with a thick binder of instructions and a ring of keys that jangled ominously. "Mr. Blake expects perfection," Mrs. Winters intoned as they moved from room to room. "Every surface must shine, every item in its proper place. You'll find the daily, weekly, and monthly task lists in here, along with Mr. Blake's preferences for everything from laundry detergent to the arrangement of his study. Emily's head swam with information, the proper way to dust priceless antiques, the exact temperature at which to serve Mr. Blake's morning coffee, the intricacies of the mansion's state-of-the-art security system. Through it all, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was an intruder in a museum rather than a housekeeper in a home. As the morning wore on, Emily caught only fleeting glimpses of Thomas Blake. He strode purposefully from room to room, barely acknowledging her presence save for a curt nod. Even in the vastness of the mansion, his aura of detachment was palpable. It wasn't until late afternoon, as Emily was polishing the banister of the grand staircase, that she had her first real interaction with her employer. Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs, his brow furrowed as he spoke rapidly into a cell phone. "I don't care what it takes," he snapped. "Get it done by—" He broke off abruptly as he noticed Emily. For a moment, their eyes met, and Emily was struck by the weariness lurking behind his stern facade. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vulnerability vanished, replaced by his usual mask of cool indifference. "Pardon me," he muttered, brushing past her. Emily watched him go, a strange mix of curiosity and compassion stirring within her. What, she wondered, had happened to make a man retreat so completely into his work, into this cold, beautiful fortress? As she finished her tasks and prepared to leave for the day, Emily found herself pausing in the foyer. She took a deep breath, inhaling the sense of lemon polish and old wood. Well, she murmured to herself, Rome wasn't built in a day. Maybe this place just needs a little warmth to come alive again. With that thought buoying her spirits, Emily stepped out into the fading afternoon light, eager to return home and hear about Noah's day. Little did she know that the mansion held secrets that would soon challenge everything she thought she knew about her new employer and the life she was building for her family. The first week at Blake Mansion passed in a blur of polishing, dusting, and learning the rhythms of the household. Emily fell into bed each night, exhausted but satisfied with the knowledge that she was providing for Noah. Still, a nagging worry persisted. Her son seemed to be withdrawing further into himself with each passing day. "How was school?" Emily would ask, only to receive a non-committal shrug in response. "Fine," Noah would mutter, picking at his dinner without enthusiasm. Emily's heart ached, knowing the transition was hitting him hard. She racked her brain for ways to help him adjust, to spark some of the joy that used to light up his freckled face. It was on a quiet Saturday afternoon, as Emily tackled some of the mansion's less frequented rooms, that everything changed. She was carefully dusting the towering bookshelves in the library when a muffled sniffle caught her attention. Frowning, she set down her feather duster and followed the sound to its source. There, wedged between a wingback chair and a heavy curtain, was a small boy with unruly dark hair and red-rimmed eyes. He looked up at Emily with a mixture of fear and defiance, clutching a worn teddy bear to his chest. "Hello there," Emily said softly, crouching down to his level. "I'm Emily, the new housekeeper. What's your name?" The boy regarded her warily for a long moment before whispering, "Oliver." Emily's mind raced. In all her time at the mansion, she'd never seen any sign of a child. Mr. Blake had certainly never mentioned a son. Yet here was this boy, probably no older than Noah, hiding away in a dusty corner of the massive house. "It's nice to meet you, Oliver," she said warmly. "That's a very handsome bear you've got there. Does he have a name?" Oliver's grip on the stuffed animal loosened slightly. "Barnaby," he mumbled. "Barnaby," Emily repeated with a smile. "What a distinguished name for a bear. I bet he's a great listener." A ghost of a smile flitted across Oliver's face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Emily's heart went out to the boy. His posture, his wary eyes, everything about him screamed of loneliness. "You know," she said conspiratorially, "I have a son about your age. His name is Noah, and he's having a bit of a tough time making friends at his new school. I bet Barnaby is a good friend to have when you're feeling lonely, huh?" Oliver nodded, his eyes widening slightly. "You have a son?" "I sure do," Emily replied. "And let me tell you, he could use a friend just as much as Barnaby here." Do you go to Maplewood Elementary too? Oliver shook his head. I'm homeschooled, he said quietly. Ah, Emily thought. That explained why she'd never seen the boy coming or going from the mansion. Her mind flashed back to Noah, shoulders slumped as he trudged to school each morning, and she felt a surge of empathy for both boys. Well, she said brightly, maybe sometime Noah could come visit, and you two could play together. Would you like that? For the first time, a real smile lit up Oliver's face. Really? You'd let him come here? Emily's heart swelled at the hope in his voice. Of course, as long as it's okay with your dad, I don't see why not. Speaking of which. She glanced around, suddenly aware of how long she'd been chatting instead of working. Does your dad know you're in here? Oliver's smile faltered. He's working, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's always working. The weight of those words hung heavy in the air between them. Emily thought of Thomas Blake, striding purposefully through the mansion, always on his phone or buried in paperwork. She thought of the empty rooms, the echoing halls, and this little boy hiding away with only a teddy bear for company. Well, she said, injecting as much cheer into her voice as she could muster. How about we get you out of this dusty old corner? I was just about to take a break and have a snack. Would you and Barnaby like to join me? Oliver hesitated, then nodded shyly. As they made their way to the kitchen, Emily's mind wandered back to Noah. She pictured him sitting alone at lunch, watching other kids play together on the playground. The parallel between her son and Oliver was striking, and it stirred something protective in her. In the gleaming kitchen, Emily fixed them both glasses of milk and arranged some cookies on a plate. As Oliver nibbled tentatively on a chocolate chip cookie, she regaled him with stories of Noah's adventures and misadventures. By the time the snack was finished, Oliver was giggling softly at her tales. You know, Emily said as she cleared away the dishes, I bet Noah would love to hear about Barnaby's adventures too. Maybe next time I come to work, you could write down a story about him. I could bring it to Noah, and then he could write one back for you. Oliver's eyes lit up. Like pen pals. Exactly like pen pals, Emily agreed. What do you think? I'd like that, Oliver said, a tentative smile playing at the corners of his mouth. As Emily walked Oliver back to his room, a space she now realized she'd been instructed never to enter during her cleaning rounds, she couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Joy at connecting with this sweet, lonely child, sadness at the obvious isolation he faced, and a growing determination to somehow bridge the gap between Oliver and his father, between this cold mansion and the warmth of a real home. She watched Oliver disappear into his room. Barnaby clutched tightly to his chest and made a silent promise. Somehow, she would find a way to bring more light into this boy's life, and maybe, just maybe, help Noah find his own place in their new world as well. As autumn painted Maplewood in vibrant hues of red and gold, Emily found herself becoming bolder in her attempts to bring warmth to Blake Mansion. The exchange of stories between Oliver and Noah had blossomed into a full-fledged friendship, with the boys eagerly anticipating each new letter from their pen pal. Emily watched with quiet satisfaction as both children seemed to come alive through their correspondence. Noah's eyes sparkled as he recounted his day's adventures for Oliver, while Oliver's imagination soared as he crafted fantastic tales of Barnaby's exploits for Noah. One crisp morning, as she served Thomas his usual black coffee, Emily decided to take a chance. Mr. Blake, she began, her heart racing. I was wondering if you might consider a family outing this weekend. There's a lovely lake just outside of town, perfect for a picnic. I thought perhaps Oliver might enjoy feeding the ducks or skipping stones. She trailed off, watching Thomas's face carefully. To her surprise, instead of the immediate rejection she'd expected, he seemed to be considering it. A family outing, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. I suppose that could be arranged, if Oliver would like it. Emily beamed. I'm sure he'd love it, sir. And if you'd like, I could pack a lunch for you both. Thomas nodded, a flicker of something like nervousness crossing his features. That would be helpful. Thank you, Ms. Matthews. The following Saturday dawned bright and clear. Emily arrived early to prepare a picnic basket, her heart light with anticipation. As she worked, she heard Oliver's excited chatter echoing down the hallway, punctuated by Thomas's deeper tones. When they departed, Emily watched from the window, a lump forming in her throat at the sight of father and son walking side by side, a picnic basket swinging between them. It was such a simple scene, and yet so profound in its normalcy. Something she suspected had been missing from this household for far too long. Hours later, she was dusting in the library when she heard the front door open. Oliver's laughter rang out, followed by a sound that made Emily freeze in surprise. Thomas Blake was chuckling. She peeked around the corner to see Oliver, cheeks flushed with excitement, regaling his father with a tale of their duck-feeding adventures. Thomas listened intently, a soft smile playing at the corners of his mouth. As Oliver mimed skipping a stone, Thomas reached out and ruffled his hair, a gesture that was becoming more frequent and natural with each passing day. "Why don't you go get cleaned up?" Thomas said gently. "Then perhaps we could play one of those board games you enjoy." Oliver's eyes widened with delight. "Really? You want to play?" Thomas nodded, his smile growing. "Really? Go on now. I'll meet you in the playroom." As Oliver dashed off, Thomas turned and caught Emily's eye. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, a wealth of unspoken understanding passing between them. Then Thomas cleared his throat. "It was a good day," he said softly. "Thank you for suggesting it, Miss Matthews." Emily smiled warmly. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, Mr. Blake. Sometimes a change of scenery can do wonders for the soul." Thomas nodded thoughtfully before heading towards the playroom. As Emily resumed her dusting, she couldn't help but feel that the seeds of change she'd been so carefully nurturing were finally beginning to sprout. Over the next few weeks, Emily noticed subtle changes in the mansion's atmosphere. Oliver's room, once stark and impersonal, began to show signs of life. Artwork taped to the walls, toys strewn about, and even a small plant on the windowsill that he and Thomas had started together. More surprisingly, Emily began to notice changes in Thomas Blake as well. She'd catch him lingering in doorways, watching Oliver play with an unreadable expression. Sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, she'd see a softness in his eyes that made her wonder about the man behind the stern facade. One rainy afternoon, as Emily was preparing to leave, she overheard voices coming from the library. Curiosity got the better of her, and she peeked inside. The sight that greeted her made her heart swell. Thomas and Oliver sat side by side on the plush carpet, surrounded by a sprawling train set. Thomas was on his hands and knees, carefully adjusting a tiny bridge, while Oliver directed him with all the authority of a seasoned railroad engineer. "A little to the left, Dad," Oliver instructed. "No, too far. Now it's crooked." Thomas chuckled, a sound that was becoming less rare with each passing day. "My apologies, sir." "How's this?" Oliver beamed. "Perfect. Now the Silver Streak can make it over Barnaby Mountain without derailing." As Thomas helped Oliver set the toy train on the tracks, Emily couldn't help but marvel at the transformation. The cold, distant man she'd met on her first day seemed miles away from the father who now sat cross-legged on the floor, fully engrossed in his son's imaginary world. Quietly, so as not to disturb the moment, Emily slipped away. As she drove home that evening, her mind was swirling with thoughts. She couldn't help but wonder about the events that had led Thomas Blake to become so closed off, to build such high walls around himself and his son. There was a story there. She was sure of it. A tale of loss or heartbreak that had turned this beautiful mansion into a mausoleum of memories. But with each shared laugh, each small moment of connection, she saw those walls beginning to crumble. And as she thought of Noah's newfound confidence, of Oliver's blossoming smile, and even of the subtle softening in Thomas's stern demeanor, Emily felt a warm glow of hope. The mansion was changing, slowly but surely. And perhaps, just perhaps, its inhabitants were changing along with it. The weeks that followed saw a gradual but noticeable shift in the Blake household. Family outings became more frequent. Game nights were established, and the sound of laughter was no longer a rarity within the mansion's walls. Emily watched with quiet satisfaction as the bonds between father and son grew stronger, and as Oliver blossomed under the warmth of his father's renewed attention. However, as with any period of growth, there were bound to be growing pains. The incident occurred on a Tuesday afternoon, as Emily was preparing Oliver's after-school snack. She had just set out a plate of apple slices and peanut butter when she heard raised voices from Thomas's study. "But Dad, I don't want to go to boarding school." Oliver's voice was thick with tears. "I want to stay here with you, and keep having Noah over to play, and—" "Oliver, we've discussed this." Thomas's tone was stern, but Emily could hear a note of frustration underlying it. "Westbrook Academy is one of the finest schools in the country. It will provide you with opportunities that—" "I don't care about opportunities," Oliver shouted. "I care about being here, with you. Don't you want me here?" There was a heavy silence, and Emily found herself holding her breath. Then, Thomas spoke again, his voice softer. "Of course I want you here, son. But I also want what's best for your future. Now, go to your room and calm down. We'll discuss this later." Emily heard the study door open and quickly busied herself with wiping down the kitchen counter. Oliver ran past, his face streaked with tears. A moment later, Thomas appeared in the doorway, looking weary and conflicted. "Is everything all right, Mr. Blake?" Emily asked gently. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "Just a disagreement about Oliver's education. Nothing for you to concern yourself with, Ms. Matthews." Emily nodded, but couldn't stop herself from adding, "If you don't mind me saying, sir, Oliver seems very happy here. The changes you've made, the time you've been spending together, it's made such a difference in him." Thomas's expression hardened. "I appreciate your input, Ms. Matthews, but I don't recall asking for your opinion on my parenting decisions." Emily felt her cheeks flush. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to overstep." "No, you didn't." Thomas cut her off, his voice cold. "In fact, I'm beginning to wonder if perhaps you've been overstepping quite a bit lately. This arrangement with your son visiting, the outings, the games, it's all been very convenient for you, hasn't it?" Emily stared at him, shocked. "Mr. Blake, I assure you." "I think that will be all for today, Mrs. Matthews," Thomas said curtly. "You may go home early. I'll see you tomorrow." With that, he turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Emily standing in the kitchen, hurt and bewildered by the sudden turn of events. The next few days at Blake Mansion were tense and uncomfortable. Thomas was rarely seen, burying himself in work in his study. Oliver was sullen and withdrawn, picking at his food and spending most of his time alone in his room. The laughter and warmth that had begun to fill the house seemed to have evaporated overnight, leaving behind a chill that no amount of dusting or polishing could dispel. Emily went about her duties mechanically, her heart heavy with hurt and confusion. She missed the easy rapport she'd developed with Oliver, the small signs of approval from Thomas, the sense that she was making a real difference in their lives. Now, she felt like an intruder in a house that had once again become a stranger to joy. On Friday afternoon, as Emily was preparing to leave, she hesitated outside Oliver's room. She could hear muffled sniffles from within, and her maternal instinct warred with her professional boundaries. In the end, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. Knocking softly, she called out, "Oliver, are you all right, sweetheart?" There was a pause, then a quiet, "Come in." Emily entered to find Oliver curled up on his bed, clutching Barnaby tightly. Her heart broke at the sight of his red-rimmed eyes and tear-stained cheeks. "Oh, honey," she said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Do you want to talk about it?" Oliver sniffled. "Dad says I have to go away to school. He says it's for the best, but I don't want to leave. Everything was just starting to be good. And now—" He trailed off, burying his face in Barnaby's fur. Emily longed to pull him into a hug, to assure him that everything would be all right. But the memory of Thomas's accusation held her back. Instead, she said gently, "Your dad loves you very much, Oliver. I'm sure he's just trying to do what he thinks is best for you. But why can't the best thing be staying here, Oliver asked, his voice small and lost. Emily sighed. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that are hard for us to understand. But I know your dad only wants you to be happy and successful. Maybe if you talk to him, really explain how you're feeling, he'll listen. Oliver nodded slowly. Do you think so? I do. Emily smiled. Your dad might seem tough, but he has a big heart, just like you. As she left Oliver's room, Emily found herself face to face with Thomas. His expression was unreadable as he said, Ms. Matthews, a word in my study, please. Emily's stomach clenched with anxiety, but she followed Thomas silently. Once inside the study, Thomas turned to face her, his blue eyes stormy with conflicting emotions. I overheard your conversation with Oliver, he began. Emily steeled herself for another reprimand. But to her surprise, Thomas's next words were soft and filled with regret. I owe you an apology, Ms. Matthews. My behavior the other day was unacceptable. You've done nothing but try to help my son, to bring some light into this house, and I repaid your kindness with suspicion and harsh words. Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. Mr. Blake, He held up a hand to stop her. Please, let me finish. The truth is, seeing the changes in Oliver, the way he's opened up, it scared me. I've kept both of us, isolated for so long, thinking I was protecting him. But watching him with you, with your son, I realized how much he's been missing out on. How much I've been missing out on. Thomas's voice cracked slightly, and Emily felt her own eyes welling with tears. I don't know how to be the father he deserves, Thomas admitted. But I want to try, and I think I could use your help, if you're willing to give it. Emily smiled through her tears. Of course, Mr. Blake. I'd be honored to help in any way I can. Thomas nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Thank you, and please, call me Thomas. As Emily left the study, she felt a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead might not be easy, but the walls that had kept this family apart for so long were finally beginning to crumble, and she was determined to help them build something beautiful in their place. The following weeks brought a flurry of changes to Blake Mansion. Thomas, true to his word, made a concerted effort to be more present in Oliver's life. Family dinners became a nightly occurrence, with Thomas setting aside his work to engage in animated conversations about Oliver's day and interests. Emily found herself taking on a role that went beyond mere housekeeping. She became a confidant to Oliver, a sounding board for Thomas, and a bridge between father and son when communication faltered. Her own relationship with Thomas evolved as well, growing from wary professionalism to a warm, if cautious, friendship. One evening, as Emily was preparing to leave, she overheard Thomas and Oliver in the library. Curiosity got the better of her, and she paused to listen. Dad? Oliver's voice was hesitant. Can we talk about school? There was a moment of silence. Then Thomas's deep voice replied, Of course, son. What's on your mind? Emily held her breath, remembering the argument that had sparked their recent troubles. I know you want me to go to Westbrook, Oliver began slowly, but I really don't want to leave. I like my school here, and my friends, and being with you. Thomas sighed heavily. Oliver, I only want what's best for you. Westbrook could offer you opportunities that... But what if the best thing for me is staying here? Oliver interrupted, echoing the words Emily had suggested. We're just starting to do things together, and I don't want to lose that. There was a long pause, and Emily found herself holding her breath. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice softer than Emily had ever heard it. You're right, son. I've been so focused on giving you every advantage that I almost missed the most important thing. Our relationship. If you truly want to stay, then that's what we'll do. The sound of Oliver's joyful whoop brought a smile to Emily's face. She quickly moved away from the door, not wanting to intrude further on their private moment. Later that evening, as Emily was gathering her things to leave, Thomas approached her in the foyer. "Ms. Matthews, Emily," he began, looking slightly uncomfortable. "I wanted to thank you. Your advice to Oliver. It helped us have a conversation we've needed for a long time." Emily smiled warmly. "I'm glad I could help, Thomas. Sometimes all it takes is a little encouragement to open up." Thomas nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Indeed. And speaking of opening up, I was wondering if you and Noah might join us for dinner this weekend. As a thank you. And, well, it would be nice to get to know you both better, outside of work." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "We'd be honored, Thomas. Thank you." As she drove home that night, Emily couldn't help but feel that a new chapter was beginning. Not just for the Blakes, but for her and Noah as well. The mansion, once cold and forbidding, was slowly transforming into a place of warmth and possibility. And Emily found herself looking forward to whatever adventures lay ahead for this unlikely family they were building together. The dinner invitation marked a turning point in the relationship between the Blakes and the Matthews. What started as a slightly awkward meal soon blossomed into a warm, laughter-filled evening. Oliver and Noah chattered excitedly about their shared interests, while Emily and Thomas found themselves engaged in easy conversation, discovering common ground they'd never expected. As the weeks passed, these gatherings became more frequent. Game nights, movie marathons, and weekend outings became regular occurrences. The once cold mansion slowly transformed into a home filled with warmth and laughter. It was during one such outing, a crisp autumn day at a local apple orchard, that Emily noticed a significant change in Thomas. As they walked among the trees, baskets in hand, she watched him laugh openly at Oliver's jokes, engage in playful banter with Noah, and even join in an impromptu game of tag. "You seem different," Emily remarked as they paused for a rest, watching the boys race ahead. Thomas glanced at her, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "Do I?" Emily nodded. "Happier? More relaxed? It suits you." A soft smile played at Thomas's lips. "I feel different," he admitted. "For so long, I thought I had to be strong, to keep my emotions in check. But now—" He trailed off, watching Oliver and Noah with a look of wonder. "Now I realize that true strength comes from opening your heart, not closing it off." Emily felt a warmth bloom in her chest at his words. "It takes courage to change," she said softly. "You should be proud of yourself." Thomas turned to her, his blue eyes intense. "I couldn't have done it without you, Emily. You've brought so much light into our lives. Into my life." The use of her first name, so rarely spoken, sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by Oliver's excited shout. "Dad! Emily! Come quick! We found the perfect climbing tree!" As they hurried to join the boys, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between her and Thomas. The lines between employer and employee, between two separate families, were beginning to blur in the most wonderful way. Later that evening, as Emily and Noah prepared to leave, a sudden downpour caught them off guard. Thomas insisted they stay the night, citing the treacherous roads. "We have plenty of guest rooms," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's no trouble at all." And so, Emily found herself tucking Noah into a bed far grander than anything in their small apartment, marveling at the turn of events that had brought them here. As she made her way back downstairs, she found Thomas in the library, a glass of whiskey in hand as he stared out at the rain-slicked gardens. "Thank you for letting us stay," Emily said softly, not wanting to startle him. Thomas turned, a warm smile spreading across his face. "It's my pleasure. In fact—" He hesitated, then seemed to make up his mind about something. "Emily, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you." Emily's heart raced as she moved further into the room. "Oh." Thomas set down his glass and took a step towards her. "These past few months have been transformative. For Oliver. For me. For this house. And it's all because of you." Emily felt her cheeks flush. "Thomas, He held up a hand, gently cutting her off. Please, let me finish. I've come to realize that what Oliver and I have been missing isn't just a housekeeper or a friend, it's a family. A real, complete family. Emily's breath caught in her throat as Thomas took another step closer. Close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. I know this is unorthodox, he continued, his voice low and earnest. And if you don't feel the same way, I'll understand. But Emily, I've fallen in love with you. With your kindness, your strength, your ability to bring out the best in all of us. And I was hoping you might consider making this arrangement a bit more permanent. Emily felt tears welling in her eyes as the full impact of his words hit her. All the emotions she'd been holding back, all the dreams she'd barely allowed herself to acknowledge, came rushing to the surface. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, reaching out to take his hand. "I thought I was the only one who felt this way." As their lips met in a tender kiss, Emily knew that her life, and the lives of everyone under this roof, would never be the same again. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change and adjustment. Emily and Noah moved into the mansion, a process that was equal parts exciting and daunting. There were moments of awkwardness as they all learned to navigate their new roles, but the love and warmth that had brought them together carried them through. Oliver, especially, thrived in their blended family dynamic. Having Noah as a constant companion brought out a playfulness in him that had long been dormant. And with both Emily and Thomas showering him with attention and affection, he blossomed into a confident, happy child. However, not everything was smooth sailing. The first major challenge came when it was time to enroll Noah in the local private school that Oliver attended. The tuition was steep, and Emily felt a pang of guilt at the thought of Thomas footing the bill. "I can't ask you to do this," she said one evening, after the boys had gone to bed. "It's too much." Thomas frowned. "Emily, we're a family now. Your concerns are my concerns, and vice versa. I want Noah to have the same opportunities as Oliver." "I know, but..." Emily hesitated. "I don't want the boys to feel like there's any inequality between them. And I don't want to feel like I'm taking advantage of your generosity." Thomas's expression softened. He took Emily's hands in his own. "I understand your concerns, but please, let me do this. Not just for Noah, but for all of us. A rising tide lifts all boats, as they say." In the end, Emily agreed, but the conversation sparked a larger discussion about finances and expectations in their new family dynamic. It was a delicate balance, merging their lives while maintaining individual identities and responsibilities. Another challenge arose when Emily's ex-husband, Mark, learned of her new living situation. He showed up at the mansion unannounced one Saturday afternoon, demanding to see Noah and questioning Emily's judgment. "You barely know this guy," Mark argued, his voice rising. "And now you're playing happy families in his mansion? What kind of example is that setting for our son?" Emily stood her ground, with Thomas by her side. "Mark, I appreciate your concern, but Noah is happy here. We're building a stable, loving home for him. Isn't that what matters most?" The confrontation ended without resolution, leaving Emily shaken and Thomas quietly seething. That night, as they lay in bed, Thomas voiced a fear Emily hadn't even considered. "What if he tries to take Noah away?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily turned to face him, seeing the worry etched on his face. "He won't," she said firmly. "Mark's not a bad father, he's just struggling with the changes. We'll work it out." As the weeks passed, they faced other hurdles, integrating their different parenting styles, navigating the complex dynamics of a blended family, and dealing with the occasional raised eyebrow or gossipy whisper from Maplewood's elite social circles. But through it all, their love for each other and for their boys remained steadfast. They tackled each challenge as a team, growing stronger with every obstacle overcome. One evening, as they sat on the terrace watching Oliver and Noah play a rambunctious game of tag on the lawn, Thomas turned to Emily with a soft smile. "You know," he said, "I used to think this house was too big, too empty. Now, I can't imagine it without the sound of laughter echoing through the halls." Emily leaned into him, feeling a sense of contentment wash over her. "It's not just a house anymore," she murmured. "It's a home." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over their little family, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a lonely single mother struggling to make ends meet, to the heart of a loving, if unconventional, family. It was more than she had ever dared to dream. Yet even as she basked in the warmth of their newfound happiness, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there were still challenges ahead. The road to building a strong, blended family was rarely smooth, and she knew there would be more obstacles to overcome. But as she watched Thomas chase the boys across the lawn, their laughter ringing out in the evening air, Emily felt a surge of determination. Whatever came their way, they would face it together, as a family. As summer approached, bringing with it the promise of long, lazy days and family adventures, Emily found herself facing an unexpected challenge. Her sister, Sarah, called one evening with news that sent Emily's world spinning. "Mom's sick, Sarah said, her voice cracking over the phone. "The doctors, they're saying it's cancer, stage trays, she's going to need a lot of help." Emily felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. Her mother, the rock who had supported her through every trial and triumph, now needed her more than ever. But how could she balance her newfound family life with the demands of caring for an ailing parent? When she broke the news to Thomas, his response was immediate and supportive. "We'll figure it out together," he assured her, pulling her into a comforting embrace. "Whatever you need, whatever your mother needs, we're here for you." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, late-night research sessions, and difficult conversations. Emily found herself torn between her life in Maplewood and the pull to be with her mother in Toronto. The boys, sensing the shift in the household's mood, became clingy and anxious. One afternoon, as Emily was packing for another trip to Toronto, she overheard Oliver confiding in Noah. "What if Emily decides to leave?" Oliver whispered, his voice tinged with fear. "What if she takes you with her and never comes back?" Emily's heart clenched. She hadn't realized how deeply her absences were affecting the children. That night, she and Thomas sat the boys down for a family meeting. "I know things have been different lately," Emily began, looking from one worried face to another. "And I want you both to know that no matter what happens, this is our family. We're in this together." Thomas nodded, adding, "Sometimes families have to face tough challenges, but that doesn't mean we love each other any less. It just means we have to work a little harder to support each other." As the conversation unfolded, Emily was struck by the maturity and compassion the boys displayed. Oliver suggested they could make cards for Emily's mother, while Noah offered to help with extra chores around the house. Their willingness to pitch in, to be part of the solution, brought tears to Emily's eyes. The following months were a delicate balancing act. Emily split her time between Maplewood and Toronto, with Thomas stepping up to manage more of the day-to-day household responsibilities. They explored options like video calls and care packages to help the boys feel connected to Emily's mother, turning her illness into an opportunity for them to expand their concept of family. Through it all, Emily was continually amazed by Thomas's unwavering support. He not only managed the household in her absence, but also flew to Toronto several times to meet Emily's mother and offer his assistance. Watching him charm her mother with his dry wit and genuine concern, Emily fell in love with him all over again. As summer turned to fall, Emily's mother's condition began to improve. The treatments were grueling, but they were working. During one of her visits, Emily's mother took her hand and said, "You know, I was worried when you told me about Thomas and this new life of yours, but seeing how he's supported you, how he's become part of our family too, I couldn't be happier for you, sweetheart." Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her two worlds, the family she'd been born into and the one she was building, were no longer separate, but beautifully intertwined. Returning to Maplewood after that conversation, Emily found Thomas waiting up for her, despite the late hour. As she sank into his embrace, she whispered, "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Thomas kissed the top of her head softly. "That's what family does," he murmured. "We carry each other through the hard times." As they stood there in the quiet of the night, Emily realized that the challenges they'd faced hadn't weakened their bond. They had strengthened it, forging a connection that ran deeper than she'd ever thought possible. With Emily's mother on the road to recovery, life at Blake Mansion began to settle into a new rhythm. The experience had changed them all, deepening their appreciation for each other and for the family they were building together. As Thanksgiving approached, Emily and Thomas decided it was time to take another big step. They would host a grand holiday dinner, inviting not only Emily's mother and sister, but also Thomas's estranged parents, with whom he'd had minimal contact since his wife's passing years ago. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked as they sent out the invitations. "It's going to be quite a mix of personalities." Thomas nodded, a determined set to his jaw. "It's time to break down the last of these walls," he said. "Our family is expanding, and I want everyone to be a part of it." The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were a flurry of activity. Emily threw herself into menu planning and decorating, while Thomas worked with the boys to create personalized place cards for each guest. The excitement in the house was palpable, tinged with a nervous energy as the big day approached. When Thanksgiving finally arrived, Emily found herself standing in the foyer, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress as the doorbell rang. Thomas squeezed her hand reassuringly before opening the door to reveal his parents, a distinguished-looking couple whose reserved demeanor immediately reminded Emily of the Thomas she'd first met. "Mother, Father," Thomas greeted them, his voice warm but slightly strained. "Welcome. Please, come in and meet Emily." As introductions were made, Emily could feel the weight of Thomas's parents' scrutiny. But before the moment could become too awkward, a whirlwind of energy burst into the foyer. "Grandma! Grandpa!" Oliver cried, launching himself at Thomas's startled parents. Noah followed close behind, a shy smile on his face. The ice began to thaw as the boys chattered excitedly, showing off their place cards and offering to take coats. Emily watched in amazement as Thomas's father's stern expression softened, and his mother bent down to admire Oliver's artwork. The arrival of Emily's mother and sister completed their eclectic gathering. As they all moved to the dining room, Emily marveled at the sight before her. 3 generations, 2 families blended into one, all gathered around a table that had once seemed far too big for just Thomas and Oliver. The meal began with moments of awkward small talk, but as wine was poured and dishes were passed, the conversation began to flow more freely. Emily's mother regaled the group with embarrassing stories from Emily's childhood, while Thomas's father, to everyone's surprise, turned out to have a dry wit that kept the table in stitches. Midway through the meal, Thomas clinked his glass for attention. "If I could have everyone's attention for a moment," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to thank you all for being here today. For too long, I've kept people at arm's length, thinking I was protecting myself and Oliver from pain. But thanks to Emily, I've learned that true strength comes from opening our hearts." He paused, looking around the table. "Each of you, in your own way, has helped shape the family we're building here. And I'm grateful for that. So I'd like to propose a toast to family, in all its beautiful, complex forms." As glasses were raised and a chorus of "to family" echoed around the table, Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. She looked at the faces around her, Thomas, his eyes shining with unshed tears, Oliver and Noah, giggling together over some private joke, their parents, who had once been strangers, now chatting like old friends. In that moment, Emily realized that they had created something truly special. This wasn't just a blended family. It was a tapestry of love, woven from threads of past pain and present joy, strong enough to weather any storm. As the evening wound down, with guests lingering over coffee and dessert, Emily slipped away to the kitchen for a moment of quiet. Thomas found her there, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "For everything. For showing me what a real home feels like." Emily turned in his embrace, looking up into the face of the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. "We did this together," she said softly. "All of us." As they rejoined their guests, hand in hand, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead might not always be smooth, but with the love and support of their ever-expanding family, she knew they could face anything. The once cold mansion had been truly transformed, filled now with the warmth of laughter, the comfort of shared memories, and the promise of many happy years to come. As winter settled over Maplewood, blanketing the town in a soft layer of snow, Emily found herself reflecting on the whirlwind of changes the past year had brought. The Blake mansion, once a symbol of isolation and cold grandeur, now pulsed with the warm energy of a true family home. One crisp December morning, as Emily was helping the boys build a snowman in the front yard, Thomas approached with an unusually nervous expression. "Emily," he began, his breath visible in the cold air. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Curious, Emily followed him to a quiet spot near the old oak tree. Thomas took a deep breath, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "This past year has been extraordinary," he said softly. "You've brought so much joy and love into our lives, into my life, and I can't imagine a future without you by my side." Emily's breath caught in her throat as Thomas lowered himself to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Emily Matthews," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you make our family official and be my partner in every sense of the word?" Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she looked at the man before her, the man who had opened his heart and his home, who had become not just a father figure to Noah but a true partner to her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course I will." As Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger, a beautiful antique piece that had belonged to his grandmother, they heard a whoop of joy. Turning, they saw Oliver and Noah watching from behind a nearby tree, their faces split with enormous grins. "Does this mean we're really going to be brothers?" Noah asked excitedly. "It sure does, kiddo," Thomas laughed, pulling both boys into a group hug with Emily. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Maplewood. While most reactions were positive, Emily couldn't help but notice the occasional raised eyebrow or whispered comment. The town's more traditional residents seemed to find the speed of their relationship and the merging of their families somewhat scandalous. But Emily and Thomas refused to let the gossip dampen their joy. They threw themselves into wedding planning, determined to create a celebration that reflected their unique journey as a family. As the big day approached, Emily found herself facing an unexpected bout of nerves. It wasn't doubt about marrying Thomas, of that she was certain. Rather, it was the magnitude of the change, the official blending of their lives and families, that gave her pause. The night before the wedding, Emily found herself unable to sleep. She slipped out of bed and made her way to the library, where she often went to think. To her surprise, she found Oliver there, curled up in an armchair with Barnaby the bear. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" she asked softly, settling into the chair next to him. Oliver shook his head. "I'm excited," he said, "but also a little scared. What if things change too much?" Emily's heart melted at the vulnerability in his voice. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, pulling him into a hug. "Some things will change, that's true. But the most important things, how much we all love each other, how we support each other, those will stay the same. In fact, they'll probably get even stronger." As they sat there, talking softly about their fears and hopes for the future, Emily felt the last of her nerves melt away. This, she realized, was what family was all about, being there for each other, through all of life's changes and challenges. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. The mansion had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with twinkling lights and fragrant evergreen boughs adorning every surface. As Emily walked down the aisle, Noah and Oliver on either side of her, she felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly took her breath away. Thomas waited for her at the altar, his eyes shining with unshed tears, as they exchanged vows, promising to love and support not just each other but their entire blended family. Emily knew that this was more than just a wedding. It was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her and Thomas, but for all of them. The reception that followed was a joyous celebration of love and family. Emily's mother, now cancer-free, danced with Thomas's father. Noah and Oliver ran around with their cousins, their laughter echoing through the halls. And at the center of it all, Emily and Thomas moved together in a world of their own, marveling at the beautiful life they had built. As the night drew to a close, Emily found herself standing on the terrace, looking out over the snow-covered grounds. Thomas joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Happy, Mrs. Blake," he murmured in her ear. Emily leaned back into his embrace, a contented smile on her face. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied. As they stood there, watching the stars twinkle in the winter sky, Emily felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The mansion that had once seemed so cold and forbidding now radiated warmth and love. And the family they had forged, unconventional, perhaps, but stronger for the challenges they had faced, was ready for whatever the future might bring. 5 years later, the sound of laughter and splashing echoed across the lake as Emily watched Noah and Oliver, now teenagers, engage in a spirited water fight with their younger sister, 4-year-old Lily. Thomas sat beside her on the dock, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. "Can you believe it's been 5 years?" Emily mused, leaning into her husband's embrace. Thomas chuckled softly. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday we were fumbling through those first family dinners. Other times, it feels like we've always been this way," Emily finished for him. The past 5 years had brought their share of challenges. Teenage mood swings, work pressures, the occasional clash of parenting styles. But they had also been filled with immeasurable joy. Lily's birth had been a beautiful surprise, cementing their family bond even further. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the lake, Emily reflected on how far they had all come. Noah had blossomed into a confident young man, excelling in school and recently landing the lead in the school play. Oliver, once so withdrawn, was now a talented artist with a close group of friends. And Lily, with her mop of curls and infectious giggle, had brought a new level of energy and love to their home. "Mom! Dad!" Oliver called from the water. "Come on in, the water's perfect." Emily and Thomas exchanged a glance, matching grins spreading across their faces. Without a word, they stood up, kicked off their shoes, and ran down the dock, leaping into the cool water amid shrieks of laughter from their children. As they splashed and played together, Emily felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This was what she had always dreamed of. A family full of love, laughter, and unwavering support. Later that evening, as they sat around a campfire roasting marshmallows, Lily piped up with a question. "Mommy, how did you and Daddy meet?" Emily smiled, catching Thomas's eye over the flickering flames. "Well, sweetie," she began, "it all started with a very big, very empty house." As she recounted their story, of a lonely widower, a struggling single mom, and the unexpected love that had brought them all together, Emily marveled at the twists and turns of fate that had led them to this moment. The mansion that had once seemed so imposing now stood as a testament to the power of love and the true meaning of family. Its halls, once echoing with silence, now rang with the sounds of life and laughter. And at its heart were Emily and Thomas, partners in every sense, guiding their blended family through the joys and challenges of life with unwavering love and support. As the stars came out overhead and the fire burned low, Emily looked around at her family, at the life they had built together, and knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. What did you think of the story? Please leave a comment with your opinion. 2 buttons will appear next to it, one to subscribe if you haven't already, and another to watch other exciting stories. Make your choice. Thanks for watching this far. See you soon.